Welcome to this Deep Dives. Today, we're exploring a perspective on family dynamics that, well, it really challenges how many of us might think about relationships. It puts the foundational link between the couple right at the very center.
That's right. We're looking at excerpts from a work called The Primacy of the Couple, A Family Rebalance. It's by Andre and Amy Coben from Project Puzzle.
And our mission here is basically to unpack the core arguments in this material. What exactly is this idea of the couple's primacy? How is it argued to sort of impact different parts of life? And, well, what's the main takeaway?
Yeah.
Now, the authors themselves, they do point out this topic can feel a bit sensitive, maybe challenging for some people.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, our goal is purely to understand the viewpoint presented within these sources.
Exactly. It's not about endorsement. It's about understanding. They're proposing really a fundamental rethink, suggesting we shift focus from what they see as maybe a common modern emphasis on parent-child stuff.
Right.
And instead really center the relationship between the couple.
Okay, so let's unpack that central idea they champion then, the primacy of the relationship between a man and a woman. Where do they ground this? It sounds like a very bold claim.
Well, what's fascinating is how they argue it's not just, some modern idea they cooked up. They actually root it quite deeply in historical and spiritual concepts. They draw connections to various world religions.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, they cite examples in Christianity, about the wife cleaving to her husband, or that idea of husband and wife becoming one flesh.
Okay.
And also the Torah's concept of a soul maybe originally created as a unified male-female entity, separated at birth, with this lifelong yearning to reunite. They even touch upon, and they're definitely not advocating for it today, to be clear, but the historical Indian custom of sati.
Right.
Suggesting it hints, perhaps, at a historical recognition of the couple's union on a level we might not immediately grasp now.
So the source is arguing this isn't just like one option among many for structuring relationships. They're positing it's something fundamental, maybe even spiritual or ancient, kind of woven into the human experience across different cultures.
Precisely. The source states it pretty clearly, actually. They say, relationships between a man and a woman are primary in this world. And they claim that the deeper they look into this, the more convinced they become that it touches all areas of life.
All areas. You mean not just personal life or family life?
That's their assertion, yeah. That this couple relationship is foundational not only for the family, but for things like, say, career success, our social interactions, even our health and our spiritual growth, too.
Wow. Okay. That's a much broader claim than just saying, the couple is important for having a stable home. The argument seems to be that this relationship is foundational for the individual's own flourishing in life itself.
That's exactly their viewpoint. The couple, in this perspective, isn't just a unit of society. They actually call it an inseparable unit. And they claim that everything most important happens inside these relationships.
Okay. So the couple is presented as the primary foundational unit. But then, of course, children often arrive, right? Born from the love of this couple.
Yes, but here's a really key point the source emphasizes. The couple doesn't stop being primary or somehow become secondary just because children arrive on the scene. It remains, in their view, the most important relationship in the family structure.
Right, and this seems to be where they pivot to look at what they see happening in many modern families. They feel there's been a significant shift, maybe in priorities, away from this core idea.
Exactly. They identify several points that they think illustrate this shift. First, they argue that families are often created primarily for the sake of having children.
Okay. Rather than the union and the love between the couple being the main reason for forming the family in the first place?
Precisely. And second, they observe that the child, their interests, their needs, their desires often becomes the absolute central focus, almost elevated to the most important thing within the family unit.
Okay. That makes sense as an observation. And a third point.
Third, they suggest that the relationships between the mother and child and then the father and child are frequently built and viewed quite independently, separately from each other, effectively, as the source puts it, sort of splitting the couple into constituent parts.
Right, which according to the source raises a big question then. If the couple is supposed to be the core, what actually happens when the child becomes the gravitational center of the family instead?
Well, the source connects this to things like seeking psychological support, for instance. They note that therapists or psychologists will almost always delve into your relationship with your mom and your relationship with your dad, and usually these are treated as two separate connections.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Right. And while they might, eventually ask about the relationship between your parents. The source argues that we are often just not ready to truly perceive or interact with our parents as a single, unified entity, as a couple.
Or maybe, perhaps, to fully respect their choices, their bond, their love for each other, even the parts we don't quite get or agree with.
Yeah, exactly. And the source ties this shift away from couple primacy to some observed modern relationship challenges. Things like difficulty navigating hardship together, maybe a readiness to dissolve relationships quickly and look for new ones. Or, in some cases, people choosing to live alone and maybe potentially burdening children with the role of a kind of pseudo-partner.
And they also link it to what they describe as a focus on satisfying our own ever-increasing needs. Is that right?
Yes, that's part of their analysis. They also suggest that as children grow up, they might find it difficult or simply not want to see their parents as a unified couple unit.
Why would that be? Maybe viewing each parent more as an individual resource, like someone to go to for specific things.
Exactly. A resource that might feel, I don't know, easier to access or manage by interacting with each parent separately, which the source believes ultimately devalues the importance of the relationships within the parental couple.
Okay, but the source does acknowledge, surely, that parents are, just human. They're imperfect.
Oh, absolutely. They make it clear parents are living their own lives, navigating their own challenges, making mistakes, learning lessons.
Right.
But despite all those imperfections, the source argues there's a really profound, almost transformative benefit in shifting one's perspective back to seeing parents fundamentally as a couple unit.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting, I think, in terms of the claimed impact on the individual. The source makes a really powerful assertion. It says, by relating to parents as a couple and to oneself as the fruit of their love, we free up a huge amount of energy of love within ourselves.
Yeah, that's a big statement. It speaks to a very deep sense of origin and identity being intrinsically tied to that specific, unique union of the parents.
So how do they suggest doing that?
Well, they propose learning to respect your parents as individuals first, as personalities. Seeing them primarily as a man and a woman with their own desires, their own life tasks, their own mistakes.
Yeah.
And only after seeing them that way, then seeing them as your parents. And they even say this applies if the parents are no longer living.
Wow. So respecting them as people first, couple second, parents third, almost?
Sort of, yeah. And the source claims that seeing them as a couple, a loving, even if imperfect, man and woman with their shared history, feelings, imperfections, that this act of seeing them that way opens up the ability to receive their love in a completely different, perhaps deeper way.
And what's the claimed knock-on effect, the ultimate result of making this internal shift?
The source concludes that this, in turn, frees up the ability to build your own relationships based on love and acceptance.
So the argument presented in the source is basically our own capacity to receive love from our origin point, which they define as our parents seen as a unified couple, is directly, intrinsically linked to our capacity to build our own healthy, loving relationships later on. So quite a powerful chain of connection they're drawing there.
It certainly is. It offers a perspective that really asks us to look at the fundamental building blocks of family, and even self, through a very specific, maybe unconventional lens.
Okay. So as we wrap up this deep dive then, we've explored this perspective from Andre and Amy Copen's work. It proposes that the most fundamental, the primary relationship in life and family is that of the couple. And the source argues that cultural and personal shifts away from prioritizing this relationship have pretty significant consequences for individuals and maybe society.
Yeah, that's the claim.
While conversely, they claim that re-embracing this perspective, seeing yourself as the fruit of that original union, can be profoundly freeing, that it can unlock one's own capacity for love and for building strong relationships.
It's definitely a viewpoint that challenges a lot of common assumptions, about family structure and how we develop as individuals.
Absolutely. So just something for you, the listener, to consider, based only on the ideas we've discussed from this source material. How might the way you view the relationship between your own parents, not just thinking of them as two separate individuals, but as the specific couple unit you came from, how might that view influence your own understanding of love, of relationships, and perhaps even your own sense of identity as, well, a product of their unique union?